Let's go into the practicalities of measuring breath acetone. There are a number of devices out there. They more or less work in the same way, namely they measure the amount of acetone in your breath, which correlates directly with the amount of acetoacetate in the blood. So if you compare the different ways we have to measure ketones, we also have the sticks for the urine, and we have the sticking in the finger for the blood, where you see beta-hydroxybutyrate. The breath acetone have some advantages. One is that it's a one-time investment. It costs a bit more to buy it, but once you have it, you just breathe, so you can measure 10 times a day. It doesn't cost anything extra. The sticks, and in particular if you stick yourself in the finger, they cost a lot more. I think it's like $1 or $2 for each blood sample you take, where this one is free. It's also real-time measurements of acetoacetate in your blood. The sticks, where you pee on them, that's urine, so you have several hours to half a day of delay. Also, you have the filtration of ketones out in the urine might vary, so it's not always directly reflecting how much you have in the blood. So therefore, the breath acetone is the most direct way, the most precise way to measure acetoacetate in the blood, at least what we have for home use. One disadvantage though is that you only see acetoacetate. You do not necessarily know how much beta-hydroxybutyrate you have in your blood. We'll come back to that. There is some correlation, but it's kind of weak, and we'll explain why that is. Another thing that can be of interest to know is that the acetoacetate do correlate with fat burning for all diets. When you are in the lower scale from 1 to 10 ppm, there is a quite linear correlation between your fat burning and the acetoacetate in your blood. Once you go over 10 ppm, that is, to do that you need to go on a ketogenic diet, otherwise you will probably not get over 10. But in this range, for all diets, even not the ketogenic one, you will actually have a direct correlation on the fat burning. So that is used in some studies actually to assess how much fat is burned during various type of diets. As we mentioned before, it's acetoacetate we measure. We don't know how much beta-hydroxybutyrate we have precisely by measuring acetoacetate. The number of levels you can look for in the breath acetone is, if you start from below here, the basal level, that's typically around 1, perhaps 2, if not 0. Then you have the ketogenic diet, where you usually can go up to 50 or 100. We have fasting, where you can exceed 100, perhaps 150, 200. And then we have diabetic ketoacidosis, which actually is a condition that can be, or is actually dangerous, where it can go all the way up to several hundred to 1,000. And that is reason why acetoacetate is used in hospitals to assess different ketoacidosis or not, because it's a quick test and you see how much of acetoacetate you have in the blood. So these are approximations to look out for, and as I said before, between 1 and 10, all diets that makes you lose weight will show something on 1 to 10. If not, you're really bad diet because you're not burning fat, you're losing weight due to some other reason than burning fat. To get above 10, you need more or less to be in a ketogenic diet, which fasting is a kind of a ketogenic diet. If you don't eat carb, you will be in ketosis. If you fast, you don't eat carbs, obviously. If you look at blood ketones, the beta-hydroxybutyrate, there are some tables out there showing some kind of optimal level. I'm not really disagreeing with them, but the beta-hydroxybutyrate ranging from perhaps 1 to 3 or 4 is where people usually feel they are in deep ketosis. The tricky part of the hero is that if you only have the breath acetone, you will not know for sure how much beta-hydroxybutyrate you have. There are some studies done on this where you can see there is some correlation between beta-hydroxybutyrate, which you have down here, and acetoacetate, which you have on the y-axis. But you can also see that some people might have high values here, like several hundred when they breathe, but they have virtually no beta-hydroxybutyrate. And vice versa, you can have quite low values and be in decent ketosis, but you're not over 100 on the breath acetone. And with it said, this is in laboratory setting where people achieve much more precise results than in real life. When you do these home devices, if I just look at myself, I often lie around here at 50 when I'm up at 3. So I'm not even in here. But that depends on which device you use and how you use it. It's important that you breathe the same way every time. Then it will be reasonably calibrated for your use. If someone else uses it, even though it's the same device, they might breathe a little bit differently, larger breath, smaller breath, hold the breath a little bit longer before they breathe out and so on. So make sure that you are consistent in the way you use it. So why is this? Why isn't there a stronger correlation between beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate? And is there a problem with that? Is there any drawbacks with that? Yeah, there is one, and the main one is that beta-hydroxybutyrate is the primary ketone. So if you want to know they are in ketosis, it depends a little bit the reasons for why you want to be in ketosis, but generally speaking, you want the beta-hydroxybutyrate to be present because that is the primary ketone. That is the ketone that triggers most genetic signals. There are a lot of genetic modification or activation when you enter ketosis, and most of these are triggered by beta-hydroxybutyrate, not by acetoacetate. Also, your brain prefers beta-hydroxybutyrate over acetoacetate. And also, acetoacetate is a little bit more acidic than beta-hydroxybutyrate. That is why beta-hydroxy is the primary ketone, because when you have large amount of it, the body doesn't want the blood to be acidic. It wants to keep the pH at a very steady level. So let's go into a little bit more in detail what this means for you. So this is a schematic of fasting. It's actually my own values, but it looks reasonably the same for most people. We can see in green here on top the blood glucose. So that one's in this case goes about 5 millimolar, and then if I'm fasting after 6 hours in my case, might vary a little bit from person to person, the blood glucose suddenly drops at least 1 unit, sometimes a little bit more. And this is a strong indication that you suddenly enter ketosis. It's very easy to see when you fast. It's more tricky to see when you're ketogenic diet because the drop might not be so profound and it is gradual. When you fast, it's just in 1-2 hours, things just spike. You drop and the ketone spike. So if we look at the red one here, that is beta-hydroxybutyrate, it usually is flat for hour after hour after hour, and then suddenly, at some point in time, in just a few hours, it raises a boom from almost 0 down to 3 or 4 millimolar. Then we have the breath acetone that behaves a little bit differently. You can see here that is the blue line. You can see here how first it increases, and then there's a little bit of a peak, and then it often goes down. This has to do with it's like the body's last attempt to get you to eat carbs. So when you stop eating carbs or eating anything because you're fasting, you burn more and more fat. That is why it goes up. But then usually before it reaches 10, it drops down. And that is because up to this stage, the body is eating trash, garbage in the body that it wants to get rid of. But once they have cleaned up the body, it goes down and now it needs to eat on the essential part, take some protein from your muscles, which it prefer not to do. So the ketones goes down and this means your hunger goes up. If you look at this one, every time it drops, your hunger usually goes up and vice versa. So it really wants you to eat carbs so it doesn't have to burn its protein. Then it gives up, okay, the guy or the woman is not going to eat, we better produce ketones. And the reason why it doesn't produce them right away is that requires a total change for the manufacturing. You have some enzymes for utilizing carbohydrates, some other enzymes for fat, and some other for ketosis. And it is a little bit of a burden for the body to change. It's like you produce one type of car and then you need to change the factory to produce another type of car. It takes some time to do that. So the body prefers not to change because it's always lazy. It tries to keep you just do what you're doing because that is, it's lazy, it's easy for it. Ironically though, for your health it's good to always change. That is why training is good, that is why it's good to be awake and then sleep. All changes is usually good for the body. Constant of something, whatever it is usually not good. Constant sleep, constant training and so on. So it really wants you to not change and just keep eating your carb, but eventually gives up, and then it ramps up the enzymes that both produce and utilize the ketones and also the entire beta oxidation and fat burning. And then what happens is that then acetoacetate starts to build up rapidly. And then it comes to a peak and then it drops. And when it drops is when the beta hydroxybutyrate goes up. Boom. And that is the tricky part, that you can have quite high values on the beta hydroxybutyrate. They can actually be up to 100 and you still have no primary ketones in there. You just have acetoacetate but no BHB, which is beta hydroxybutyrate. And then once you get BHB, the acetoacetate drops. And that is the reason why you don't have that perfect correlation between these two. And there's an explanation to why this is happening, why the body behaves like this. So let's look into that. You can see here, as we mentioned before, that what is regulating what here. So the first step, the production of acetoacetate, is braked by carbs. If you have carbohydrates, you don't get no acetoacetate and therefore no beta hydroxybutyrate. But the second step is braked by insulin. So you can then build up beta hydroxybutyrate, and you build more and more and more, and then finally, when you build more and more, the pressure increases to kind of open those floodgates. It's like a dam. We have filled it up with water, and then the floodgates open to release it out. So it's a combination of how much acetoacetate you have and how much insulin you have. So if insulin eventually goes down, or if acetoacetate just goes too high, finally, eventually, the gates will open and the water will flood out. And what happens then? The level here goes down, of course, because you have one inflow and one outflow. And that means the level of acetoacetates goes down a little bit. So before the real ketosis occurs and you get beta hydroxybutyrate, BHB, the acetoacetate level will be higher. And then when this second gate opens, the level goes down. So that is one of the things many people seem to be confused about. They argue which one is the better to measure and all this, but they do tell different stories. And if you do a blood sample and have no BHB, it's very encouraging to look if you have acetoacetate. If you have no acetoacetate, you know what's the problem. There's too much carbs in the system. It can come from protein converting to carbs, can come from something else. Sugar alcohols, which are essentially carbs, something that you didn't know is carbs, for example. But if the carbs are low and you have no beta hydroxybutyrate, then it's the insulin levels. You have too much insulin for some reason. And the best way to get it down is fasting. Some people get insulin from various types of proteins, even from fat sometimes, even from anxiety or stress. So there's a various amount of things that influence it, and it's not only insulin, it's other hormones also, but it's mainly insulin. Like glucagon will raise it, and also some other hormones block it. But generally speaking, the first step is regulated on the cellular level, on how much glucose there is in, then the second step is more hormonal level. And here also comes some situation that I get a lot of questions about, that people have measured their acetoacetate and their BHB, and after doing fasting a few times or ketogenic diet in some periods, the amount of acetoacetate that needs becomes less and less. So first time they're up to 200 before they get any BHB. Second time they're up to 100 and then up to 50. So they think they're in less ketosis, but actually they're not. It just means that they don't need to fill up this level of acetoacetate so high because they have lower insulin. The insulin goes down with the fasting and all the good things they do if they start to exercise and eat clean. So in that way, by measuring how much acetoacetate you need, how many ppm acetone you have before you get the BHB, that also indicates if you're doing some kind of improvements on your insulin, circulating insulin, for example. Also, it can be so that you eat something, a little bit of carbs, a little bit too much protein, a little bit of something fast that flushes the system and releases insulin. And what happens then? If you suddenly release some insulin, this one is blocked. And what happens then with acetoacetate? Well, as long as there's not too much carbs, there's still an inlet flow here. and that means the level starts to go up. So suddenly, by doing a little bit of cheating, you get more acetacetate. So then people might misinterpret that, oh, I did some cheating and I got more ketones, I should cheat a little bit. No, you shouldn't, because most likely your BHB have been going down. So if you can measure both, you will see this exactly how it behaves. But if you're aware of this, if you're aware of these boogie traps, so to say, I think the breath acetone is a very good tool. It can be wise to learn where your level is when you start to produce beta-hydroxybutyrate and what level. But I use both, and I use the acetacetate a lot because it's simple and fast, and I can measure every 15 minutes or whatever I want. I can eat something and right away see if it converts to carbs. So if I buy food outside, is it carbs in there? I might be a little suspicious sometimes. Surprisingly often, when you don't cook yourself, those acetacetate level just drops when you eat something. You eat something, you buy out, you think it's clean, but for whatever reason, acetacetate drops, so there must be some carbs in there. If I cook it, do it myself, I'm fine. So that's one way to use it, one way to assess it. And also, if I go on a diet, I will start with acetacetate, because I know unless I'm over 10, there's no point of measuring BHB. I haven't got anything yet. And I've learned approximately where my breakpoint is for that. So I can see on acetacetate when I actually have beta-hydroxybutyrate also. So that's it for today. Welcome back to the next episode.